Good morning and welcome to Module 3. This is actually a continuation of the production module, and in this module we're going to step a little bit deeper into the process of production. In other words, you going out into the field and actually acquiring the raw material with which you're going to build your story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And of course this material is primarily powerful images and clean, usable sound. Okay, those are the main ingredients of this whole methodology. So we're going to use 3 films here that I've done in recent years that I use fairly continuously as teaching tools. The first one is called Nurses Needed, and it's about a project that I did in New York City, working on a story about the crisis actually of the nursing shortage here in the United States. I worked in the Presbyterian hospital system, and I did the piece for a program called Now on PBS. The second film is a film that I did in Afghanistan, and it's called Afghanistan: The Forgotten War. And I did this for the same outlet, Now on PBS. This was in 2008. I spent a few weeks in the field with the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. And the third film that we're going to use is one called The Voice of Hope. And I did this for ABC's Nightline with Ted Koppel in the late 90s, actually, in the African country, Central African country of Burundi. So we're going to use these 3 films to illustrate and to teach, some of the important points of production. Let's go back to the first one, which is Nurses Needed. So my assignment was to go to New York and do a story about this crisis, this shortage of nurses around the United States. For a lot of different reasons, there's a big crisis in the availability of nurses to care for the new generation, my generation actually, of baby boomers who are getting older and who need more care as we get older. So, for a number, I think the shooting period was about 6 weeks long, and I live here in Washington, D.C., and once or twice a week, I would take the train to go to New York City, work with a couple of assistants, and we would, go to different sections of the system, which is a huge system in New York City. And with the assistance of the public relations people there, they would show us, they would introduce us to patients, they would introduce us to doctors, they would introduce us to nurses. And it was my job primarily to figure out who the characters are going to be and how we explain this very, very complex issue of the nursing shortage in the United States. So, I want you to watch this film. All of these films are going to be made available to you through this course. I want you to watch this film and look at how we selected the characters that we chose to drive this film. As I said in the previous module, the best stories are told through the prism of one person, one football team, one platoon, one classroom, whatever, and the characters who make up that group of individuals. And in this case, I had to figure out who were the strongest cases and marry those cases with some of the strong characters on the nursing staff, okay? So, one of the reasons why there's a nursing shortage in the United States is the fact that it's a really high intensity career, and nurses, men and women, the burnout rate is very, very high. Studies show that during the first year of practicing as a professional nurse, about 25%, I think these numbers are correct, about 25% of nurses leave the emergency room or leave hospital care and go into something different, associated with nursing, like insurance companies and so forth. But they leave, the high stress field of nursing in hospitals, and especially in the emergency room. So I had to find a character who, embodied, this stress that nurses go through and why they burn out so quickly. And again, the shooting period was about 6 weeks. I would have staged these occasional weekly forays to New York City to shoot for a day or two, and then come back to Washington, where I live and where I work at American University. And my job was to find a person who embodied that stressful job of nursing. And when I saw Megan Stack, who is one of the best and most efficient nurses that I've ever met, when I saw her, I knew that she was going to be the person who embodies this idea of a stressful career and why nurses burn out at an early stage. And I used the camera, I think, in a very, very appropriate way so that I could, move with her and really underline and emphasize how quickly she's moving, how stressful it is, how much of a physical exercise it is to be a nurse in an emergency room. So, one of the things that I want you to pay attention to when you watch this film is watch how the shooting and the editing, coincide with the material. When I show a patient laying in bed, a sick, a young woman is another character in the film, or a very old man, we see his hand kind of like, make a gesture like that. The pace with which that section is edited corresponds with the situation that we're trying to describe. In other words, when we see Megan Stack, she's running around back and forth and doing all these tasks in her ward, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm dancing, and we with this new technology, I'm not using a big Betacam that weighs 40 pounds. It costs $40,000. I'm using a handheld camera with which I can move around and dance with her and move from one side to another, get down, get up, do all these kind of exercises. And by doing that, I'm emphasizing, I'm underlining the movement that she's going through. So, it's appropriate for me to be moving around with Megan Stack to emphasize what she does. Pay attention to that, please. This is a really important lesson, I think. And not only is the shooting different, but the editing is different. Instead of like these long clips, which we might use, showing a person lying in bed and talking about his or her illness, when we see Megan Stack, it's one clip after another, one clip after another. She's moving, we're cutting. It's 2-3 seconds long for each clip. So both the shooting style and the editing pace, are appropriate for the content. Okay, that's pretty much lesson number 1 for this module. We'll go to lesson number 2 in a second.